Michael is 67. He worked for 42 years. Most of those years were steady. A manufacturing job early in life. Later, a maintenance supervisor position. Nothing extraordinary, just consistent work. Paychecks, bills, mortgage payments, car replacements. The normal financial rhythm of adulthood. Today, the mortgage is gone. The house is fully paid off. His children are independent. And like many retirees across the country, his retirement income now comes from a single source, Social Security. His monthly benefit is $1,800. That equals $21,600 per year. No pension, no significant investment portfolio, just Social Security and careful budgeting. On paper, the numbers appear manageable. His home is paid off. He does not travel much. He lives modestly. So the plan seems simple. Spend carefully, avoid unnecessary expenses, and make the income stretch. But retirement planning rarely breaks in the first year. It rarely fails in the first 5 years. Most retirement plans look stable at the beginning. The real question is different. What happens when that same income must support someone for 20 or 25 years? Because retirement math is not about a single moment. It is about how small pressures compound over time. Inflation, healthcare costs, home maintenance, taxes, insurance. These forces rarely arrive suddenly. Instead, they move slowly, almost quietly, until the structure begins to tighten. So, in this episode, we are going to model a very specific retirement situation, living on Social Security alone, specifically $1,800 per month, no investment withdrawals, no pension, no supplemental income, just a benefit check. And we will follow that scenario across 3 different time horizons, year 10, year 15, and year 25, because retirement stability is rarely determined in year 1. It is determined much later, when the original assumptions begin to collide with reality. But before we move into long-term projections, we need to start with something simpler. The first year, the moment when everything still appears balanced. Because the first hidden risk in retirement planning usually appears right there, inside the year 1 budget. Before projecting 10 or 20 years into the future, we need to slow down and examine something very simple. The first year. Because when someone lives only on Social Security, the entire retirement structure begins with a single number. Michael receives $1,800 per month. Over a full year, that equals $21,600. That is the total income available to cover every expense. Housing, food, transportation, insurance, healthcare, utilities, and everything else that appears during the year. Now, in Michael's case, there's one advantage. His house is already paid off. That removes the largest expense most retirees face. But owning a home does not eliminate housing costs. It simply changes them. Property taxes still exist. Maintenance still exists. Repairs still arrive eventually. So even without a mortgage, housing still carries financial weight. Let's build a very simple retirement budget. Not an extreme budget. Not a worst-case scenario. Just a realistic baseline. Housing-related costs, property tax, maintenance, and basic repairs. Approximately $350 per month. Food and groceries. About $400 per month. Utilities, electricity, water, heating, internet. Approximately $200 per month. Transportation, fuel, insurance, occasional repairs. Around $200 per month. Now we reach one of the most important categories in retirement, healthcare. At age 67, most retirees are enrolled in Medicare, but Medicare is not free. Part B premiums, supplemental insurance, and prescription plans all carry costs. A reasonable estimate is about $250 per month for premiums. In addition to that, there are out-of-pocket healthcare costs, doctor visits, medication, unexpected treatments. We can estimate another $150 per month. Then we include a few additional categories: insurance, personal expenses, basic discretionary spending, clothing, small household purchases, occasional gifts. Those categories together may add roughly $250 per month. Now, when we combine all of these numbers, the monthly total looks like this. Housing, $350. Food, $400. Utilities, $200. Transportation, $200. Healthcare premiums, $250. Healthcare out of pocket, $150. Insurance and miscellaneous, $150. Discretionary spending, $100. That brings the total to exactly $1,800 per month. In other words, the system appears balanced. Income equals expenses. The budget works. And this is the moment where many retirement plans stop, because on paper, everything looks reasonable. But this is also where the first hidden distortion begins, a distortion that is easy to overlook. Not every expense grows at the same speed. Inflation does not move evenly across a household budget. Food prices can fluctuate. Utilities may rise slowly, but healthcare costs often grow much faster. Home maintenance rises with labor and material costs. Insurance premiums adjust over time. Meanwhile, Social Security benefits increase through something called cost of living adjustments, commonly known as COLA. These adjustments are designed to help benefits keep pace with inflation. But historically, the increase in Social Security income does not always match the real cost increases retirees experience. This creates a subtle financial pressure, a gap that begins very small. So small it may not even be noticeable at first. But over time, that gap can widen, slowly at first, then more quickly. Which means the real question is no longer whether the budget works today. The real question becomes this: what happens when those expenses continue rising for 10 years, while the income grows at a different speed? Because this is where retirement math begins to change. And the first real divergence often appears much sooner than people expect. So next, let's move forward 10 years and see what happens to the same retirement budget over time. So now let's move forward 10 years. Michael is no longer 67. He is 77 years old. The retirement budget we just built still exists. Housing, food, utilities, transportation, healthcare, insurance. But none of those expenses remain frozen in time. Over a decade, prices change. Sometimes slowly, sometimes faster than expected. To understand what happens next, we need to introduce three very simple assumptions. These are not extreme assumptions. They are long-term averages used frequently in retirement modeling. First, general inflation. Across many decades, the average rate of inflation in the United States has been close to 3% per year. Some years are higher, some years are lower. But 3% is commonly used for long-term planning. Second, healthcare inflation. Healthcare costs historically grow faster than general inflation. Many estimates place healthcare inflation between 5 and 6% annually. For this model, we will assume 5.5%. Third, we must consider Social Security adjustments. Each year, Social Security benefits may increase through the cost of living adjustment or COLA. Over long periods, the average COLA increase has been roughly 2.4% per year. That number changes from year to year, but as a long-term average, 2.4% gives us a reasonable projection. So let's apply those assumptions to Michael's situation. In year one, his Social Security income was $21,600 per year. If that income increases by roughly 2.4% annually, then 10 years later his benefit would rise to approximately $27,300 per year. That sounds like a meaningful increase. His income has grown by nearly $5,700 annually. At first glance, that seems reassuring. But now we need to compare that growth with the other side of the ledger, expenses. Remember the original budget we built. In year one, Michael's total annual expenses were also about $21,600. Now we apply inflation. General living costs rising around 3% per year. Healthcare rising closer to 5.5%. When we project those expenses forward 10 years, the total annual cost of living rises to approximately $28,900 per year. And that is where the first structural gap appears. Income at age 77, $27,300. Projected expenses, $28,900. The difference is small, only about $1,600 per year, roughly $130 per month. On the surface, this still feels manageable. It does not immediately create a crisis. But the important point is not the size of the gap. The important point is that the structure has changed. In year 1, income and expenses were balanced. By year 10, expenses have quietly moved ahead of income. The budget now requires adjustments. Small adjustments at first. Michael might delay replacing his car. He may postpone certain home maintenance projects. Perhaps he reduces discretionary spending. Dental procedures might wait another year. Small decisions like these begin appearing more frequently. And the retirement plan still works. But something important has changed. The margin of safety is gone. The system now operates with tension. Because once expenses move ahead of income, the gap rarely reverses on its own. And this is where retirement math becomes more interesting. Because the first 10 years rarely determine the outcome of retirement. The real pressure begins appearing later, when compounding inflation continues working quietly in the background. So now let's extend the same model forward another 5 years and see what happens when a retirement budget reaches year 15. Now let's move forward another 5 years. Michael is no longer 77. He is now 82 years old. The same retirement structure still exists. One primary income source, Social Security, and a household budget that continues adjusting to rising costs. But something important happens between year 10 and year 15. The pressure that once appeared small begins to accelerate. To understand why, we need to return briefly to the assumptions we used earlier. General living costs rising at about 3% per year. Healthcare costs rising closer to 5.5% per year. And Social Security income increasing through cost of living adjustments, averaging roughly 2.4% per year. Those numbers may appear relatively close to each other. But over longer periods of time, small differences in growth rates begin compounding. Let's start again with income. At age 67, Michael's annual Social Security benefit was $21,600. After 15 years of COLA adjustments averaging 2.4% annually, his benefit rises to approximately $30,900 per year. That increase may feel significant. His annual income has grown by nearly $9,300 since retirement. But now we must look at the other side of the ledger. Expenses. Housing maintenance has continued rising. Property taxes have adjusted upward over time. Utility costs have increased. Food prices have moved higher. Insurance premiums have changed. And healthcare costs have continued growing faster than general inflation. When we project Michael's living expenses 15 years into retirement, the annual cost of maintaining the same basic lifestyle rises to approximately $35,700 per year. Now, compare the two numbers again. Annual income, $30,900. Projected expenses, $35,700. That produces a shortfall of roughly $4,800 per year, or about $400 per month. At this stage, the retirement structure begins feeling different. Earlier in retirement, small budget adjustments could absorb the gap, but as the difference grows larger, the choices begin changing. Instead of delaying discretionary spending, more structural decisions appear. Major home repairs become harder to fund. Medical expenses require more careful planning. Unexpected costs carry greater financial weight. And there is another important detail in this timeline. Michael is now 82 years old, but statistically, many retirees live well beyond that age. According to actuarial tables, someone reaching their early 80s often still has many years of life expectancy remaining. which means the financial pressures we are modeling are not occurring near the end of retirement. They are occurring in the middle of it. This is why long-term retirement planning must extend beyond the first decade, because inflation rarely stops after 10 or 15 years. It continues quietly in the background, and the gap between income and expenses can widen more quickly as time passes. So now we need to extend the same model further. Another 5 years, another decade, and see what happens when the retirement timeline reaches year 20 and eventually year 25, because this is where the structure of the plan becomes fully visible. Now, let's extend the timeline further. Michael is no longer in his early 80s. He is now 87 years old. 20 years have passed since retirement. The same structure still exists. One primary income source, Social Security, and a set of living expenses that have continued adjusting to economic reality. At this point, the early retirement years are long behind him, and the question becomes much more direct. Has the income structure remained stable over 2 decades, or has the gap continued widening? Let's begin again with income. Michael's original Social Security benefit was $21,600 per year. After 20 years of cost of living adjustments, averaging about 2.4% annually, that benefit grows to approximately $34,700 per year. So, over 2 decades, the annual income has increased by roughly $13,000. That increase may sound reassuring, but retirement math only becomes meaningful when income and expenses are viewed together. Now we apply the same inflation assumptions to the expense side. Housing maintenance continues rising with material and labor costs. Food prices gradually increase. Utilities adjust over time. Insurance premiums move higher. And healthcare expenses continue growing faster than most other categories. When we project Michael's cost of living forward 20 years, maintaining the same modest lifestyle now requires approximately $43,800 per year. Now, compare the numbers again. Income at age 87, $34,700. Projected living expenses, $43,800. The annual gap has now widened to approximately $9,100 per year, or roughly $750 per month. At this stage, the pressure inside the retirement structure becomes much more visible, because a gap of this size cannot easily be absorbed through small lifestyle adjustments. Major financial decisions begin appearing: selling a home, relocating to a lower cost area, moving closer to family, or significantly reducing spending in certain areas. But retirement may not end at 20 years. Many people live longer than expected, which means we should extend the model one step further, to year 25. Michael is now 92 years old. His Social Security income has continued adjusting through annual COLA increases. At this point, his annual benefit has grown to approximately $38,000 per year, but the cost of maintaining the same basic lifestyle has continued rising as well. Housing maintenance, insurance, utilities, food, healthcare, all of these expenses have continued compounding over time. When projected forward 25 years, the same lifestyle now requires approximately $52,000 per year. Now the difference becomes clear. Annual income, $38,000. Projected expenses, $52,000. The gap is expanded to approximately $14,000 per year, more than $1,000 per month. And this is the central structural risk of relying on a single fixed income source in retirement. The system may begin balanced. It may even remain stable for many years. But over long periods of time, small differences between income growth and expense growth begin compounding. And those differences eventually become visible. But there's another important question we still need to explore. Because the income Michael receives today is based on a specific decision. He claimed Social Security at age 67. What if that decision had been different? What if he had waited just a few more years before claiming benefits? That alternative scenario changes the entire structure of the retirement timeline. So next, let's examine what happens if Social Security is delayed until age 70. Up to this point, we have modeled Michael's retirement using a specific assumption. He claimed Social Security at age 67. His monthly benefit became $1,800, or $21,600 per year. But Social Security allows retirees to make another decision. They can delay claiming benefits. And when benefits are delayed, the monthly payment increases. Between the ages of 67 and 70, Social Security benefits grow by roughly 8% per year through delayed retirement credits. That means waiting 3 additional years increases the benefit by approximately 24%. So instead of receiving $1,800 per month, the benefit would increase to approximately $2,230 per month. Annually, that becomes about $26,800. Now, this decision requires something important. Those 3 years between 67 and 70 must be funded in another way. Some retirees continue working. Others rely on savings. But the trade-off is simple. 3 years of delayed income in exchange for a permanently higher benefit. To understand the impact, we can run the same retirement projection again using the larger benefit. Let's return to the same timeline, 10 years after retirement. Michael is now 80 years old in this scenario. His starting income at 70 was $26,800 per year. After 10 years of COLA adjustments, averaging roughly 2.4%, his Social Security income rises to approximately $33,800 per year. Now, compare that to the same expense projection we used earlier. At the 10-year mark, projected living costs were about $28,900 per year. In this case, the structure looks different. Income, $33,800. Expenses, $28,900. Instead of a deficit, the system still has a margin, about $4,900 per year. That margin acts as a buffer. Unexpected costs can be absorbed more easily. Small repairs, medical expenses, car maintenance. The retirement structure remains flexible. Now let's extend the same model to year 15. Michael is now 85 years old. His Social Security income continues rising with COLA adjustments. Annual income becomes approximately $38,200. Meanwhile, the projected cost of living remains around $35,700. The gap between income and expenses has narrowed, but the system is still stable. Income still slightly exceeds expenses, which means retirement decisions remain flexible. Even by year 20, the difference between income and expenses remains smaller than in the earlier scenario. The retirement structure experiences pressure, but it does not break as quickly. And that difference comes from a single decision: delaying Social Security for 3 years. The key insight here is not that delaying benefits solves every retirement challenge, but it changes the trajectory of income across the entire retirement timeline. Higher income compounds, just like inflation does. And that raises an important modeling question. If retirement income must last 20 or 25 years, which matters more, receiving income earlier or receiving a larger income across the entire retirement horizon? In a moment, we will explore a few additional variables that can change this model even further. Because real retirement rarely follows perfect projections. Unexpected costs appear, healthcare events occur, homes require repairs, and longevity itself can extend the timeline beyond what many people originally expect. So far, the projections we have modeled follow a relatively smooth path. Income grows gradually through Social Security adjustments. Expenses rise through inflation, and the difference between those two forces slowly changes the structure of the retirement budget. But real life rarely moves in such smooth lines, because retirement rarely unfolds exactly as projected. Instead, certain variables appear unexpectedly, and those variables can shift the financial structure very quickly. The first variable is healthcare shocks. Even with Medicare coverage, retirees frequently face periods of higher medical spending. specialist visits, new medications, procedures that require additional treatment. Out-of-pocket expenses for retirees can easily rise into the range of $3,000 to $7,000 in a single year. For someone living on Social Security alone, that amount represents a large portion of annual income. $3,000 is nearly 2 months of Social Security benefits. $7,000 can approach 4 months of income, which means even a single year of elevated medical costs can place noticeable pressure on a fixed-income retirement budget. The second variable is housing maintenance. Many retirees enter retirement with a fully paid-off home. And while that removes mortgage payments, the home itself still ages. Roofs eventually require replacement. Heating and cooling systems fail. Plumbing systems deteriorate. Electrical components require repair. Major home repairs are rarely small. A roof replacement can cost $10,000 to $15,000. An HVAC replacement may cost $6,000 to $10,000. Foundation repairs or structural maintenance can exceed those numbers. These costs do not occur every year, but when they arrive, they can exceed several months of retirement income. The third variable is longevity itself. Many retirement plans quietly assume a 20-year timeline, but life expectancy often extends beyond those assumptions. A retiree who reaches their mid-80s frequently lives longer than expected, which means retirement could last 25 years or even 30 years. When that happens, the pressure created by inflation continues working for additional years. Living costs continue rising. Healthcare expenses continue adjusting upward. Insurance premiums continue changing. Meanwhile, the retiree's income structure remains largely fixed. This is why retirement planning often requires more than simple budgeting. It requires stress testing. What happens when a large expense appears unexpectedly? What happens when retirement lasts longer than expected? What happens when inflation moves faster than projected? These questions are rarely asked in the early years of retirement because the system still feels stable. But as the timeline extends, these variables begin interacting with each other. Healthcare costs rise while income grows more slowly. Home repairs arrive while budgets are already tightening. Longevity extends a period in which these pressures continue compounding. And that leads to an important moment in the retirement modeling process. Because once we see how these variables interact with a fixed income, a natural question begins to appear. If your retirement income were fixed today, how would you prepare for the expenses that continue rising over the next 25 years? Would the strategy rely entirely on careful budgeting? Would it rely on additional savings? Or would it change the timing of retirement income itself? That question may sound simple, but the answer often determines how stable retirement feels over the decades that follow. At this point in the model, the mathematics are fairly clear. A retirement funded only by Social Security can appear stable in the early years. Income arrives every month. The budget works. Expenses remain manageable. But as time passes, the structure begins to change. Not suddenly, gradually. Small gaps begin appearing between income and expenses. Healthcare costs rise slightly faster. Insurance premiums adjust upward. Maintenance costs increase. Individually, these changes may feel manageable, but together, they slowly tighten the financial structure of retirement. And this is where retirement becomes more than a mathematical exercise. It becomes psychological. Because financial stability is not determined only by income and expenses, it is also shaped by the margin between them. When income comfortably exceeds expenses, retirees often experience something important: confidence. Unexpected costs feel manageable. Decisions remain flexible. Travel can still occur occasionally. Home repairs can be addressed without major stress. The system has breathing room. But when income barely matches expenses, the experience of retirement begins to feel different. Every unexpected cost carries more weight. A medical bill may require cutting spending elsewhere. A home repair may require postponing other needs. Small financial decisions begin to feel more significant. Over time, that pressure can quietly affect how retirement feels, not just financially, but emotionally, because retirement was meant to remove the stress of income uncertainty. Yet, when the budget becomes tight, that uncertainty can return in a different form. This is why many retirement planners focus not only on covering expenses, they focus on building margin. Even a small amount of additional income can dramatically change the structure of retirement. An additional $8,000 to $10,000 per year, for example, can eliminate many of the gaps we saw earlier in the projections. That additional income might come from several places: a modest investment portfolio, part-time work during early retirement, delayed Social Security benefits, rental income, or other supplemental sources. The key insight is simple. Retirement confidence rarely comes from perfect budgeting alone. It often comes from the presence of financial buffers, small cushions that absorb the normal surprises life produces. And once we recognize that difference between fragile retirement and resilient retirement, the next step becomes clearer. We can begin identifying the decisions that strengthen the structure before retirement begins. Once we step back and look at the full model, several patterns begin to appear. None of them are dramatic, but together, they reveal the decisions that shape retirement stability over time. So rather than focusing on a single outcome, we can extract a few practical decision rules that help retirees evaluate their own situation before retirement begins. The first rule is simple. Before retiring, project expenses across 20 to 25 years. Many retirement plans focus heavily on the first decade, but as we saw earlier, the early years often appear stable. The real pressure tends to emerge later, when inflation has had more time to compound. Modeling retirement over a longer timeline reveals those structural changes much earlier. The second rule is to separate healthcare inflation from general inflation. Healthcare costs historically grow faster than most other categories, which means using a single inflation assumption across the entire budget can underestimate long-term costs. By modeling healthcare separately, the projections become more realistic, and potential gaps become visible sooner. The third rule involves Social Security timing. Many retirees claim benefits as soon as they become eligible, sometimes because they want income immediately, sometimes because they worry about future policy changes. But the decision to delay benefits increases monthly income permanently, and that larger income continues across the entire retirement timeline. As we saw earlier, waiting from age 67 to 70 increased the benefit by roughly 24%. That increase compounds across every year that follows, which can significantly reduce the income gap later in retirement. The fourth rule is to create at least one additional financial buffer. Even a modest retirement portfolio can dramatically change long-term stability. For example, a portfolio of $200,000 could potentially generate $8,000 to $10,000 annually through conservative withdrawals. That single addition can eliminate much of the gap we observe in the later projections. And the final rule is to stress test retirement plans against unexpected events. Medical costs, home repairs, longevity beyond original expectations. These events do not occur every year, but over 25 years, they are highly likely to appear at least once. Modeling those scenarios in advance allows retirees to prepare rather than react. None of these rules guarantee a perfect retirement outcome, but together, they strengthen the structure of a retirement plan. They create margin, they reduce vulnerability, and they help transform retirement from a fragile financial system into a more resilient one. Which brings us back to the central question that began this episode. At the beginning of this episode, we introduced a very simple situation: a retiree living on $1,800 per month in Social Security. In the first year, the numbers appeared balanced. Income matched expenses. The budget worked. But retirement decisions rarely reveal their full impact in the first year. They reveal themselves over time. 10 years later, the first gap appeared. Expenses quietly move ahead of income. By year 15, the gap widened further. And by year 20 to 25, the difference between income and living costs had grown into a much larger financial pressure. None of those changes happened suddenly. They happened slowly, through inflation, through healthcare costs, through the natural compounding of time. And yet a single decision had the power to reshape much of that timeline. Delaying Social Security benefits by 3 years increased income permanently. That one adjustment created additional financial margin across every year that followed. This is why retirement planning often focuses less on predicting the future and more on understanding the long-term impact of decisions made today. Because once retirement begins, many of those decisions become difficult to reverse. Living on Social Security alone may be possible. For some retirees, it works for many years. But the true question is not whether the system works today. The real question is how that system holds up after 20 or 25 years of rising costs. And that leads to a question worth considering. If your retirement income were fixed at this moment, how would that income hold up against the next 25 years of inflation? Because the most important retirement decisions are